But speaking of things and how they're supposed to be, I just want to say a few things about a topic that I just keep diving in and out of from time to time. And this has to do with activism and how I feel that activists of any stripe really are often mistaken in their approach. So, of late, I've been interacting mostly with LGBT activists online. So, these are Ugandan LGBT people, most of whom don't live here. A few do, but most don't. But the ones on Twitter who are very noisy and very vocal don't. I've been having my running spats with them because I criticize their tactics. So, in principle, and I've maintained this, I take no personal issue with one's sexual orientation or what two consenting adults of the same sex do. I don't care. Of course, in instances where the sexual interaction is coercive, it is forced, it is an assault, or it is with a minor, then obviously there I would be in support of harsh penalties being doled out to the perpetrators. And even the LGBT activists would agree. I don't think there's an LGBT activist anywhere who would say that a gay defiler should not be punished, or even a lesbian one for that matter. Perhaps they will often challenge the conflation between the defilement and the consensual adult acts, and I think that is a fair complaint, and indeed it is true, because heterosexuals defile children also. And yet we don't normally conflate heterosexual defilers with heterosexuality in general, whereas in Uganda there is a tendency to conflate gay defilement or like same-sex defilement and make it seem like that's all a part of gays or LGBTs in general. So I would reject that conflation too. But still, in as far as how they engage with the discourse and the dialogue with the wider public, I feel like they get so many things wrong. Could be because a lot of them don't live in Uganda, but they just have not learned the art of engagement or public relations. You see, I studied public relations. I studied for a certificate in public relations, and over the years, I've dabbled in a bit of activism here and there on different issues, not LGBT, but I was for a period of time a free thought activist. I was an activist for secularism, free thought, atheism, critical thinking, that kind of thing. And I had my little club called Free Thought Kampala. You can check out our website. I think it's still there. And we were active for a period of time from between, I would say, probably from 2010 to about 2012. Obviously, we weren't necessarily being stigmatized to the same scale as, say, the LGBTs were. Because, yeah, it's Uganda. Not too many people are going to care whether you believe in God or not. But there were a few people that would take issue with us, most notably the State Minister for Ethics and Integrity at the time, Dr. James Nsaba Buturo. I believe he's passed away. I think he's deceased. But anyway, at that time in the around 2009, 2010, he was out here saying atheists want to destroy society. So I remember wanting to get involved in the public discourse to help to, I guess, diffuse any building animosity towards atheists, because I foresaw that it could very easily snowball into something bigger if left unchallenged. So as soon as he started trying to target atheists, and that's how it starts. It starts with one person trying to talk smack about a group. And then when left unchallenged, other voices start to chime in, and then you sort of have a snowballing effect where it builds critical mass, and you have an avalanche of resentment, and before you know it, there's a bill tabled in Parliament targeting people like you. So for the LGBTs, that's kind of where they found themselves. And indeed, the laws that have thus been proposed, tabled, and even passed and assented to by the president are not fair. But a lot of it, I believe, could have been avoided if the engagement had been more strategic in the period leading up to it. But at the same time, you see, activists were quite happy with the continued anger being expressed, and in some ways acted in ways to encourage the anger, because they would take a snapshot of that anger and then go to their donors and supporters overseas and say, hey, look, this is how we're being tormented, this is how we're being oppressed. And this is true of many sort of oppression, grievance, activists, organizations, is that you want to be able to present a worst case scenario at all times. The sky must be falling at all times. Only then are you going to be able to justify the huge donations you're seeking from your benefactors and your donors, and for the speaking engagements and all those opportunities. You can't be like, some people are saying a few mean things about gays. No, you have to be like, yo, they're out here trying to kill us. And so a lot of the activist class were quite happy to stoke the animosity and be provocative, and they got to where eventually led to a bill. Now, had there been members from within the community that were more strategic and also had been able to to deal with this kind of stuff in a more nuanced way, to draw the public in a conversation, then I think it would have made a difference. And I think where the atheism activism, if you can call it that, not that I was preaching atheism, more it was like I was just saying atheists aren't like terrible people. In my case, obviously, I had no financial motives. I had a job at the time. I was quite comfortable. And I was just doing this because, I was just keen to have that conversation going. I was not seeking any support from any international secularist or atheist groups. And so my motives were at least sincere in that it wasn't profit oriented. Whereas for a lot of the activists, profit is the motive. And so they will try and antagonize as many people as possible, and then predictably use obtain a rather harsh counter reaction, and then they will use that to again say, hey, look, here's why we need $500,000 for the next financial year, kind of thing, or however much it is that they get from these organizations. So in as far as the engagement with the public is concerned, that's the first way in which I think they failed. The second way that I believe that they failed is that they certainly didn't try to they certainly have not been very good at dealing with their crazies. Now, in every activist organization or every activist movement, you are always going to have your crazies. Whereas the initial founding members might have pure intentions, you will soon, at some point, attract people who want to use you to push their own agenda. So they see you pushing your thing, and they're like, wow, it's gaining traction. And then they're going to try and come and will either try to hijack your thing and make it about their pet issue, or they're going to come and insert themselves into your structures and then subvert your mission and make you do other things, or just destroy your organization. Because if you don't keep an eye open for these types of bad actors, what's going to happen is that your movement, your activism, has the potential to really just backfire. So in the case of the LGBT activist community, the one thing they seem to not want to acknowledge are the genuine concerns that are being raised by wider society. So if as an LGBT activist, your concern is, okay, I don't like that they're saying that gays want to defile children. Okay. Now, we know that the narrative is pervasive, as I mentioned earlier. The conflation between a sexual orientation and the crime of defilement. So, seeing as it is a legitimate concern, because it is true that there is same-sex defilement going on. There are errant adult men that are seeking sexual encounters with children of the same sex. This cannot be disputed. There are people who do that. Now, instead of saying, oh no, well, that isn't us, or instead of like either trying to sweep that under the rug or to not want to address it more directly and forcefully, what ends up happening is that you are unable to engender the confidence and the trust of the community that you are trying to integrate into. So instead of calling everyone a homophobe for pointing out cases in which children have been defiled by a same-sex adult, instead, collectively, the movement of activists should be denouncing, like loudly, like people should be seeing that first and foremost before they hear anything else from you. That's what they need to associate with you. That, yeah, these activists are determined to root out and to punish those who would target children. Like that has to be, as soon as someone thinks of LGBT activists, that should be the first thing that pops up in their mind. Because failing to do that You're just going to keep uh, letting people have that lingering doubt and lingering suspicion. And anytime you try to bring that up with them, they dismiss you. They call you a homophobe, and so that distrust not only lingers, but it grows and it snowballs, and then you end up with this kind of terrible legislation. So if through their organizations they were publishing bulletins and writing statements denouncing these characters, or helping law enforcement and the authorities capture individuals that could be involved in that kind of activity and child sex trafficking, grooming, that sort of thing. Like if the activists themselves were at the front line of helping to expose those more errant members of their community, it would go so far towards making people less anxious about the whole movement. I wish they knew this, but they'd rather not. They'd rather just lash out and blame everyone for everything, and then just sit back and watch as public sentiment gets even worse. Now, is it fair that people would have such a perception even if the conflation is not a valid one? It's not fair. I agree. But again, it's about tact. It's about what's practical. It's about what's sensible. And it's about what's productive, right? Because unless you are able to start thinking more strategically, you're never going to get to where you'll actually have any impact. And it's just going to turn into a lifelong grift where you're going to keep acting in ways to antagonize the public, refuse to address any of the concerns that they have. You see, you don't have to convince me that you're not all out there defiling kids. I get that. But a good number are. So be willing to discuss that and be willing to show your interest in solving that problem. It would take the activists a long way and help them towards achieving their goals. The example I like to cite always in terms of minority groups and being strategic in public relations and integration with the wider host community, I like to point to Chinese, Koreans, Japanese. They're my favorite people on the planet. But so, do you remember the time when there was a mass shooting in Virginia Tech in America? It's considered to be one of the worst mass shootings. Considered to be one of the worst mass shootings ever in North America. And what happened was that this Korean American young man student entered his university with automatic weapons, and he just massacred. I don't know how many they were. Were they like 40? I think to date it must be the most lethal school shooting, the most with the highest death toll. I could be mistaken. But he was Korean American. So obviously everyone was like, oh man, this is terrible. This is just unfortunate. Now, even as those discussions were unfolding about what could have caused this, what's the scope of the tragedy, how can we change the laws, even before anyone raised a single question about the ethnicity of this student and how it may or may not have contributed to or have been a factor in this tragedy, guess what the people of the Republic of Korea were doing, or South Korea? They were holding nationwide vigils. The people of South Korea, who have no direct connection to this boy, they don't know him, but he happened to be an American boy whose roots are in South Korea. The entire nation of South Korea got together and had held candlelight vigils to mourn the victims of that massacre at Virginia Tech University. I believe the president of South Korea at the time issued national apology on behalf of the people of Korea, and there was just this outpouring of grief and apology and just sorrow from the people of Korea, towards the people of the United States. I just want you to think about what message that sends to Americans. It sends them this message. Wow, this is a responsible community. They hold themselves accountable. In other words, if I were to be walking down the road and I encountered a Korean walking towards me, I can take some solace in the fact that he won't act in a way that would bring shame to his nation. I can take solace in the fact, or I can get get comfort in the fact, in believing or assuming that he is part of a wider community that will in some way hold him accountable and responsible, and that might restrain him from committing a crime against me. I mean, it's not a perfect rule. We're talking about perceptions by and large. And so wherever you see concentrations of East Asians, Chinese, Koreans, and Japanese, because they have that sort of that traditional way of thinking, that mindset, I think it's somehow rooted in Confucianism. You know, it's essentially, and I think I've heard someone talk about how in East Asia they have I think there's a difference between a shame culture and an honor culture. And I think in East Asia they have an honor culture. So that is the primary uniting philosophical bond between the members of that community is honor. That in acting a certain way, you can potentially bring honor or dishonor to the family, to the community, and to the country. And there is such a heavy social toll imposed of anyone that will not comply, that it just makes everyone sort of stay in line and conform, which is why these societies tend to be the safest places in the world, and where these populations might be integrated in, say, Western societies or societies outside of their own. They're usually viewed favorably and usually viewed as responsible model citizens. So let's now come back to the LGBT issue. Where's the self-policing? We're not seeing enough of that. And to just borrow a leaf from the Koreans and the East Asians, if there was an aggressive self-policing effort, if you could somehow convey through your actions that yours is a community that absolutely denounces and does not tolerate any kind of violation of a minor or any kind of forced sexual encounter, you have no idea how far that would take you towards making people believe that, yeah, they are a community that I trust, that I can feel comfortable having my children around, that I can feel comfortable being a part of a wider society. You see, because you're not trying to convince the more thoughtful ones. You're trying to convince those who sort of are thinking from a more emotional standpoint and an irrational standpoint. You got to build trust and engage in forms of activism that builds trust, because failing to do that, essentially you're just going round and round in circles, and it's just going to stoke even more animosity towards you, which, like I mentioned earlier, at least as far as the activists go, it seems that's what they want, because it's the fuel that keeps their engine burning, their grift running, or one could say. And so this is just my take on the whole activism thing and how it's important to operate from a strategic standpoint. And this is not just limited to LGBT activism, really any form of activism. And in my case, as a former activist for free thought, secularism, and atheist, where there were times when members or people who were atheists were out there doing foolish things, I would be among the first people just saying, this guy has nothing to do with us. He's a fool. He's an idiot. Don't listen to him. Don't take him seriously. I wouldn't just automatically go to his defense and say, oh, you're just targeting him because you're a bigot. No, if he's done something foolish, he deserves to be called out, and I'd be the first one to do it. And when that is done repeatedly and over time, you just sort of build that trust. Your community is able to gain the trust of the wider community that you're seeking acceptance in, right? So that's just something random that I thought I'd throw at you to get your thoughts on that. But you can let me know what you think.